Pop quiz. What are the words that come to mind when you think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Time's up. I'm guessing words such as heroic, civil rights, faith and equality, and prosperity come to mind. Now, what if I told you in the US there are over 900 streets that honor Dr. King, but ironically, many of those streets don't match the words you were thinking of? There is an MLK Boulevard in almost every major city. As we know, many of our cities are suffering in terms of education, jobs, housing, and so much more. I believe if we can begin to rebuild MLK Boulevard, we can rebuild our communities. Welcome to the King Boulevard Block Party.
Woke up late morning, I was thinking. Had a dream of a dream, Martin started preaching. Kings fighting hard for what they seeking in the scenic road they never chose. Full disclosure, we must love our demons.
MLK.
Martin Luther King, he came and led the way. Pushed us towards greatness away from slavery. He came through the trenches fighting hard for the picture. We are all mankind and we one in the scriptures.
Street.
The K for MLK always stood for a king. And those that are in power only chasing the green. They named the street after one of God's greats, one that relate black with other biblical saints. While most MLK streets only reside in the hood, where the whoop whoop blue bloods kill black lives in the hood.
Dream.
Black and brown do struggle. And most to survive have to do with legal hustles. Through one man's dream, inspired a culture to flourish.
I grew up in a little town in North Carolina, and it was separated black and white, east and west, and the separating street was Panola. So when they named Dr. Martin Luther King Drive, the half of that street that they decided to rename in the black side of the community was Martin Luther King Drive. In the white side, it remained Baker Street. So every time you would go, you would know exactly when you passed from black to white, which is really sort of a shame. And I've lived in 5 cities with MLK Boulevard. So I want to ask, why is it so significant and why is it so important to maintain this relevance? We know who he was, but why a street? Why is this what we need to be doing? Mr. Agee, why don't I start with you?
Dr. King visited Milwaukee a couple of times in 1957 and 1964. Here in Milwaukee, that is our only street named after Dr. King. And it wasn't an easy change. In 1967, there was a unrest that caused fires. It followed other cities where there were riots that happened. And it wasn't until 1984 that what was named 3rd Street became Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. But in that 1984 time period at a common council meeting, the historians will tell us that there was individuals on 2 sides of the room. One room was completely the black population, and the other side of the room was the white population. And that fight was over renaming the street from 3rd Street to Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. So now what we have is Dr. Martin Luther King Drive, and we have Old World 3rd Street. And as you can guess, the Old World 3rd Street was renamed for those who did not want Dr. Martin Luther King's name associated with their business. So, as I look at that, that racial time and the times we're in now, and trying to bring people together, create that unity, the work that I do to continue to advance Dr. King's life's mission and creating unity, social justice, equity, it's so significant here in Milwaukee because, again, this is our only street that's named after Dr. King, and it should be representative of who he was.
Dr. Morgan, the same question. This is so important for so many people and has been for so long. Talk to me a little bit about the cultural significance of that. I used to live in Dallas, and it was a big deal. Here in Detroit, there is a whole, Martin Luther King Boulevard, but why is it so important?
Well, in my opinion, we want to keep Dr. King and his ideals relevant, keep it on the minds of people. People need to know who he was, or at least inquire about that. So our kids who didn't grow up watching him on television, Martin Luther King Boulevard, they may inquire, who is Martin Luther King Boulevard? So I think, and it's very strategically placed. Martin Luther King Boulevard leads to the Texas State Fair Park, which is the highest producing enterprise in Texas annually. And people come from all over the country, from all over the world. So they have to come up Martin Luther King to get to that place. So I think it's very strategic in the sense that it keeps his name on people's tongues. It keeps him relevant. It reminds us of who he was and what he stood for, and it creates a platform for people to inquire about who is this guy. So, yeah.
It's not rocket science. In Dr. King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? He wrote, "The Constitution assured the right to vote, but there is no such assurance of the right to adequate housing or the right to an adequate income." In his later years, Dr. King began shifting from civil rights to human rights, jobs, education, eliminating poverty. What role did his later mission play in the revitalization of MLK Boulevard and the greater community? And I want to start with you, Dr. Alderman.
Well, I think, right now revitalization is absolutely what we're talking about. And it's what a lot of different community organizations and activists and elected leaders should be talking about. I know it's something that in our community here in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm speaking from, is something that we're actively engaged in discussing. And I think, my take on this is the revitalization really does need to be absolutely tapped into King's memory. It needs to be a case where King's teachings are guiding some of the very discussion and decisions that are made about revitalization, and revitalization for whom. And that revitalization has to be responsive to the communities that live on those streets, that identify with those streets, that have their histories tied to that street. And I really think the revitalization, it has to be something than just sheer raw economic development and investment. It has to be community empowerment, and it really has to be very cognizant of history. And it has to pay attention not just to the history of King, but the history of how that street came to be what it is. What does it mean to people? And what can we do to make sure that we don't lose that as we try to, in fact, address well-being? And then the last thing I would say is I think this is where Earl Hardy and his colleagues' film fits in so beautifully. There has to be a revitalization of language. There has to be a revitalization and a change in the way we talk about King's namesakes. Not that we're forgetting the struggles and the problems, but there's a lot of people in our society that stigmatize King's name and King streets. And I think what Earl's film is attempting to do is to force us to come to grips with the way we talk about these places. And we need to be, I think, more dignified in the way we do that.
Thank you for saying that. I want so many of our heroes to be more than posters. So that's so important. I don't want to put you on the spot, but since you've been studying this for so long, how many King Street Boulevard drives are there that we know of across the country?
Well, I am so grateful that you asked me that question, because I spent my Christmas holidays updating my database, and I think this is probably the first place I've had a chance to share it. So this is late breaking news. My count of Martin Luther King streets in the U.S. is 995, and those are found in 41 states, District of Columbia, and even a few in Puerto Rico. They're, of course, heavily concentrated in the South, but they are a American road is the term I like to use. They are an American road.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Imagine if we applied that idea of economic development to all of those streets in all 41 states. And that takes us back to Dr. King's question, which was the title of his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Where do we go from here? What are the next steps that must be taken to advance the mission of social justice that he championed? I want to start with you, Dr. Morgan.
Well, I again refer back to starting internally, making connections with people that can make a difference. You know, I'm just one woman, and what I do is go like where the heart of the community and just look around and see what needs to be done, and then hopefully engage or recruit others that um, want to participate in making it happen. So I think that, you know, just putting our feet, it's kind of a grassroots deal initially. The people that love that neighborhood, the people that care about the neighborhood, and the people there taking the initiative to access all of the various resources and bringing things together to do whatever needs to be do that's specific for each neighborhood. You know, some neighborhoods are drug infested, some neighborhoods are, and so you know that would be someone would have to wrap their arms around that and address that in that particular MLK district. In another district, you just have a bunch of abandoned houses, and so this is somewhere else, another city. So specific for that, you know, people that are in a position to make a difference, to do something, may not have the resources, but the connections, you know, to address specific needs and just plug it out, step at a time.
That's great.
That's the only way I can see it being done as one person, and that's from my personal experience. The hospital that we're trying to renovate on Martin Luther King. I'm in the fourth year of trying to renovate it, but I'm going to renovate it to its best, Class A medical facility.
Oh,
And
wow.
getting some, you know, pulling together $3 or $4 million is just not an easy thing, you know. So you have to put all your pieces together, and I have to be out there, and the people that are interested in making this happen, I have to interact with the city, so you know, fortunately, there's a climate for something like this. There's a thirst for it, not just on the quote unquote black side, but you know, Martin Luther King, Dr. King's vision called for everybody to come together, and there are people in places, powerful places, that are just as excited about just the imagined, you know, utopic kind of existence if we could just get past some of our isms, you know. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, that
Absolutely.
so, you know, just from one person, step at a time, then you've got your people, you know, in the
Okay, and Mr. Agee, same thing. Where do we go next?
You know, I think it's about developing a set of a best practices toolkit. You know, as we look at our Dr. Martin Luther King streets and we look at advancing, you know, social justice, um, there are things that we're dealing with in some Martin Luther King drives that others are not. Gentrification, displacement. Seattle, for instance, did a paper, a thesis as a part of a master's program looking at Chicago, DC, um, St. Louis, Chicago, Cincinnati, and there are certain things that are happening. And part of that is gentrification and displacement, experiencing a little bit of that on Milwaukee's, on and around Dr. Martin Luther King Drive in Milwaukee. But, you know, figuring out ways to work together to see who's doing what around the country in order to improve Dr. Martin Luther King Drive streets on a national scale. There are some great things that are happening. Philanthropy is coming to the table in different ways, providing funding to support entrepreneurs, you know, in Milwaukee in particular. You have conversations about a streetcar in Milwaukee and what impact that has from transportation mobility standpoint. We can think about, you know, the residents who's in some cities, like in Milwaukee, the taxes are going up, you know, around our Dr. Martin Luther King Drive because we are nearby our downtown. We're adjacent to our downtown. So there are things that are happening there that are important to making sure that people are not displaced. We have an anti-displacement fund that is in place now to help those who are legacy property owners to stay in place. So, you know, as I think about where do we go from here? It's about having these conversations. Thank you, Earl, and everyone who's here today for having me as a part of this, because as I think about what do we do, I talk to folks in St. Louis about what they're doing there, and some of the things that we can potentially provide from Milwaukee is some strategies to improve the St. Louis MLK Drive. So really like working together, not just in our own cities, but on a national level, on a city by city basis, to see ways that the conversation can be broadened to make sure that at the end of the day, you know, we all have vibrant Dr. Martin Luther King drives, because ultimately I think that that would be beneficial to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, his family, and our cities.
Well, before I give Dr. Alderman the last word, I want to say that there's a Vanessa in the audience who just said what I was thinking. What if there were a national, renovation and rehabilitation plan for all the MLK streets, boulevards, and drives around the country? That would be something. And even though we really need to work on by us, for us, we are at a time in this community of America, because of the death of George Floyd, where people actually are paying attention and hearing for the first time what they need to do. So maybe there's an opportunity here to do something like that. I was so glad to see that in the chat. So Dr. Alderman, you've seen these streets, you've studied them, and you've let us know there's more than 900 of them. What do you think is like just one thing that could make a huge difference in changing the way people see these street boulevards, drives, and brings it to a new level?
Well, I really do appreciate as well the comment about a national level project, because one of the things that I think is absolutely needed, not just from an academic standpoint, but from I think a social work, a development standpoint, is we need to conduct nationwide community studies. We need to have nationwide conversations on all of these streets. We need to figure out what people's needs are. We need to figure out where they are within the various hierarchies of income, and jobs, and food deserts, and health inequalities, and so forth. The last thing I'll say about this is although we really had a very meaningful discussion of the need to make these changes from within the community, and I think that's absolutely the leading edge. I will say this as a white Southern male, as I look back on my colleagues that I work with, and I don't always see enough activity on their part, is that we need to hold, I think, a white establishment accountable for their complicity, and not paying attention to these streets and these communities for so many years, and holding them accountable for helping build coalitions, and doing the reparative work necessary to have, I think, King's dream come to full fruition. I've argued in a lot of places, and I'm not arguing from my perspective, but I'm arguing what I hear from a lot of activists. These streets are not just simply memorials to King and to a vibrant Black civil rights movement. They are the extension of the civil rights movement. They are ongoing terrain around which those issues continue to be debated and fought for.
Thank you, Dr. Alderman. I got a chill right then, because that's absolutely right. I'm so glad that we are taping this so that all of these folks who are participating tonight with these great ideas can be heard. And I'm so glad that so many people will hear your words, because that was the most important thing I've ever heard anybody say about these streets. They are not memorials. They're supposed to be extensions of the civil rights movement. And what better way to continue King's work than that? So I know that it's almost time for us to go to the questions from the audience, but
yes,
I do
Rochelle,
have
it's
to
that
ask.
time.
Oh, it's at that time, Sabrina? All right.
That
Well,
time,
listen,
yes.
it was a pleasure. It was literally my honor to talk with the three of you. Thank you so much. And we're going to move to questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, the panel. You guys were so dynamic. I really appreciated everything that you shared, and I learned so much. So, Rochelle, we do have a couple of audience questions that we want to get to, because they're asking about any number of things. Somebody wants to know, how do we translate Dr. King's vision from the 60s to 2021? People are asking about reparations. Someone wanted to know about the genre of the movie. Why is it a social comedy versus a documentary? But the one question I would like for your panel and you to address, and someone said, what are the practical things that these viewers can do to help honor the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? And how can they promote MLK Boulevard efforts in their community? So if you guys can tackle that question, because I know you can't get to all the other ones.
Well, why don't we start with that one? And since you've done some concrete things in Milwaukee, Mr. Agee, let's start with you and see if we can't get to everybody.
If there's a local organization on your Dr. Martin Luther King Drive that is doing the work, support them. If there isn't, I encourage you to go to your elected officials to press them to make sure that the Dr. Martin Luther King Drive in your city is being taken seriously, and it's not experiencing the kind of blight and disinvestment that some communities experience. That's, to me, very critical, because it's going to take the will of the people, as it did to change a lot of the names from whatever it was to Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. It took the will of the people. It's going to take the will of the people now to really push hard and make folks feel uncomfortable. I accepted this position at the historic King Drive bid already with the mission of Bronzeville in Milwaukee, the African American Cultural Entertainment District, which is adjacent to our Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. So it just made sense for me to continue to kind of come up with the tools, whether it's grants to property owners to improve buildings. That's one of the things we do. We provided some doing a thing called Cash Mob, where we supported businesses by giving them sort of a stipend just for being in the area to support them. So things that are monetary, but also things that are political, where again, it may require you to be a little uncomfortable. Contact that, council person, that mayor, and say, hey, our Dr. Martin Luther King Drive deserves some attention, and we need you to do your part to make sure that there's some funding that's going to our street improvement fund, or building improvement fund, or business development, economic development for new businesses to come in the area. Because as Dr. Alderman said, and he's someone who I studied when I was doing my paper, so I appreciate him and his comments, it really is going to take people holding folks accountable in order for Dr. Martin Luther King streets to be uplifted.
And Dr. Morgan?
In total agreement with what he said. Voting for the city council people, the officials there that we feel like are effective. A lot of people feel like, these small elections for the various communities, like the small council for this different districts, the zip codes, they don't, they get out for the president, but they don't get out for these other elections, for these small community officials to be elected based on, what they can do for our community.
Absolutely. Let me add one thing, because this is important. If you've never driven down your MLK Boulevard or Drive or street in your community, that's one of the first things you can do. Go and look at it, actually see what's there, see the condition of the houses or the commercial structures, or actually even the ground. Because if your city is not at the least making sure it's up, the upkeep is right, you can start with that.
Yeah.
What else?
I just wanted to say, support the businesses there. Sorry. Just want to say, support the businesses there.
Yeah, that was another one I was going to say. We have town hall meetings, and support the businesses on that street. Most of them on the MLK in Dallas, most of the businesses are Black owned, and good businesses. So supporting those businesses is really good too.
Great. Thank you so much to our amazing panel, and to Rochelle Riley for hosting that conversation. Thank you all for sharing such valuable information. Hey, if you didn't know, Rochelle is the author of the 2018's The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery, published by Wayne State University Press. She is also the co-author of the upcoming That They Live. It's a collection of essays and photographs of famous African Americans that every child should know about, especially African American children. And again, that's published at Wayne State University Press 2021. To get these resources, please visit RochelleRiley.com for more information about these great books. Guys, again, thank you so much. You were a wonderful panel.